Thank you for joining us. We'll be doing the first segment talking about the title of the program, and it's self-explanatory. Here come the woke right, the real woke right. And we're seeing now the mask is off this week. We'll talk about this. We'll break it all down for you in great detail as to what this situation is. You got the Trump administration basically once again attacking the First Amendment under the guise of fake hate speech. The very thing that so-called conservatives were screaming and frothing at the mouth during the Biden administration and before that for, trying to cancel free speech under the phony guise of hate speech. Well, the so-called right, the so-called conservatives are now doing this. Why? In the wake of the Charlie Kirk shooting, and also while there's an ongoing genocide being carried out by Israel and the United States and their allies in Gaza to completely annihilate, exterminate, and ethnically cleanse any surviving native Palestinians. That's happening now. So all this is great cover for that, okay? And also it helps for any authoritarian regime or any fascist regime, and I don't use that term lightly, fascist, and especially since the Trump derangement syndrome was a real thing. Let's be honest. From 2016, 2015, 2016, right through his first term, it was a very real thing. All the Democrats and the sort of Lincoln Project crowd and the rhinos, but mainly the Democrats, radical progressives, and so forth, are accusing Donald Trump of being a fascist before he even got into office, before he was able to even try to do anything fascistic. And now this administration, this regime in Washington is openly fascist, doing things that fascists do, like violate posse comitatus and deploy the military onto the city streets of America for no particular reason other than, well, there's a lot of crime, so we're going to deploy the military. So a complete systemic failure in the U.S. Trump comes in, deploys the military, chasing foreign students out of the country for having an opinion against Israel, opposing a Holocaust in Gaza. That will get your visa revoked and get you kicked out of the country. Marco Rubio is chasing after student body presidents and people writing op-eds on behalf of Israel. So an attack on the First Amendment. And now this, after the Charlie Kirk shooting. We'll break this down. In the second Overdrive segment, we'll be joined by our teammates from ACR, Hesher, Ruckus, hopefully Basil Valentine as well. And we'll get into it. But I'll lay out the basic case. In the meantime, we got a few other housekeeping items. Well, maybe we'll cover those in the second segment. So at some point, we're going to have to get down to business here. Now, we have to bring the story right back to its first beginning on this. And this term, there's a term that has been circulating recently called the woke right, okay? And it's been misappropriated by the pro-Israeli crowd, okay? And it's interesting because we coined that term after October 7th, 2023. And I'll explain to you how this works, how this dynamic works. But we coined this term because what you saw after October 7th was, again, all of these so-called conservatives completely losing it because people were pointing out the fact that Israel was mowing down Palestinians at record numbers. And the fact that they were attacking any critics of Israel or U.S. policy against Israel as being so-called anti-Semitic. I mean, that's about as woke as you can get. If wokeness, according to the Ben Shapiro's of the world and the Jordan Petersons of the world if wokeness or woke ideology is predicated on identity politics, then is there any higher order of identity politics than Zionist Israel? I mean, this is the pinnacle of identity politics. It's religious level identity politics. To question it, to criticize it is deemed to be blasphemous in American society and also in Western Europe, and throw the UK in there as well. They've weaponized this term anti-Semitism. It's been broadened to such an extent that it can be used to cancel everyone. And I mean everyone. We're not talking about low-level bloggers, people like that getting deplatformed. We're talking about the heads of major political parties getting their careers canceled, getting kicked out of the party that they served for their entire life. Jeremy Corbyn is a perfect example. This is the woke right. And the woke right, after October 7th, was trying their absolute best to cancel pretty much anybody that was criticizing Israel or pointing out the facts of what was actually happening in Gaza at the time. So, you know, when we talk about the woke right, the real woke right. So some people, the pro-Israel neocon crowd, hijacked this term after that we were using in the aftermath of October 7th to point out the double standard on the sort of Zionist MAGA crowd, the double standard. They're wanting to cancel everybody. And now they're doing it again after Charlie Kirk's shooting, after the Charlie Kirk assassination, murder, whatever you want to call it. They're doing it again. And now the mask is really, really off. Now they're doing it out in the open. And then they're trying to employ the executive of the federal government to do the dirty work. Okay. It's not just woke right, it's fascist. It's absolutely fascist. And we'll bring on screen. We'll see if we can bring on screen some of the genealogy of this, because I think it's important that people understand it. And we do have a situation whereby a lot of people are so bamboozled and confused by all of this. And I'm talking about, mainly I'm going to reach out to people that identify as Republicans and conservatives, and people, Democrats, and those on the sort of left wing as well. This is pretty much for everybody. So we'll walk you through this process. But when we're talking about the real woke right, okay, these are the real snowflakes on the right. These are the same people that would rock up on college campuses in the United States, and, you know, grown men in their sort of late 30s, 40s, and like Jordan Peterson types, 50s in some cases, but Ben Shapiro, for example, they'll rock up on U.S. college campuses and they'll want to wail on sort of young undergrads, whatever, purple-haired, gender fluid, whatever, you know, college students. And clearly they're able to intellectually outmatch them, especially in semantics and debate, and beat up on them over LGBT and trans issues and so forth. I mean, at this point, I don't really get into the whole trans thing, because to me, it's just patently ridiculous. The whole concept of it, how it's been elevated to the top of sort of left-wing identity politics causes of, quote, marginalized groups. It's, you know, people who are on the left need to understand that identity politics has destroyed the left. The left used it in order to beat down the opposition, to create new rule sets, to control bureaucracies and institutions. And then that thing they created, that little dragon, turned out to be a big dragon and completely engulfed the left, as it were, in Western politics, and is and still is destroying it. Okay. But so what the type of people that were recruited to do this and that were elevated by the conservative mainstream, and also, funny enough, backed and elevated by the Zionist, billionaire funded Zionist media apparatus. Okay. They headhunted people like Jordan Peterson. And behind this, you'll find operators like Ben Shapiro, who is, for all intents and purposes, a representative of the Israeli government, of the state of Israel, who masquerades as an America First, masquerades as MAGA. He's been doing that for a while. But they put up these beta males, these sort of generally weak individuals like Jordan Peterson, who, when you apply a little pressure on a major issue, completely throws temper tantrums on Twitter and completely becomes disheveled and bursts out into tears on television in some cases. And so these aren't the best role models, but they're targeting, these are sort of fake conservative icons that are really liberals that they brought in to colonize the conservative media space. And they tried to attract other beta males who are going to resonate with that same energy that Jordan Peterson exudes. And when pressed on the issue of Israel and what they're doing to the Palestinians, of course, Jordan Peterson folds like a cheap deck chair. And what does he do? Immediately rushes to take the Israeli side and starts quoting Bible verses. And it's completely insane. And meanwhile, people like Ben Shapiro are in the background just kind of wringing their hands, loving it. They managed to capture this very important demographic. And you also have Christian conservatives. So when we talk about the woke right, that's a good snapshot right there. That's a very good snapshot of, this is emblematic of what the real woke right is. These are Christian Zionists, Jewish American Zionists, pro-Israeli Zionists, of course, like Shapiro, and they are the woke right. So these are beta males fighting against left-wing betas on trans issues and all this other stuff. But when it comes to pushing back against Israel, they do none of that. Even if Israel slaughters and annihilates millions of Palestinians by the end, and they are, and we'll show you the real numbers in a moment. So they're not alpha when it comes to actually saving lives and Christian lives in the Holy Land. People like Glenn Beck, a lot of virtue signaling as a Christian, but talks about Judeo-Christian values, but doesn't have any time to try to address that type of situation, which is just despicable. I mean, this is just the worst abrogation of humanity that any of us has seen in our lifetimes and will ever see, and worse than previous generations have seen. And these people, they're cheering it on enthusiastically, and that is the woke right. And they're very happy to set people against each other so long as nobody challenges the big ticket issues, and those are geopolitical issues. So these guys are basically sheepdogging the U.S. domestic audience on this. And it's just so disingenuous. So that brings us to Charlie Kirk. And let's talk about this now. Turning Point USA. Very important conversation. So on the back of his killing, his assassination, his murder, you have the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, and she seems to be confused over hate speech and free speech. Now, the right have decried the term hate speech as being completely arbitrary and theoretical and has no grounding whatsoever in in the post-Enlightenment liberal democratic era, the rational era. Okay. And now the right is crying hate speech of anybody that speaks ill of the late Charlie Kirk. Or this could easily be extended to anybody who criticizes the foreign state of Israel in the United States. Certainly, this is something the ADL would be drooling over, the Anti-Defamation League, one of the many thought police, speech police organizations set up by the Israeli lobby to quell any dissent or criticism of Israel within the United States. So Pam Bondi is Trump's attorney general. And we have to ask the question, where did Pam Bondi come from? And we'll get to that. So she's crying hate speech on this issue here. And this is what she says. She says, there's free speech and then there's hate speech. There's free speech and there's hate speech. And there is no place, especially now after what happened to Charlie, using his first name on first name terms, what happened to Charlie for that in our society. So you can't say anything that she can construe as offensive, because she will then, in her arbitrary position of interpreting speech, or Trump's arbitrary position interpreting what is offensive speech, or Fox News or whoever, she will then deploy the full force of the federal government to shut it down, and to maybe, as she threatened, to jail people. She said that. And so the Free Speech Center, you can see Middle Tennessee University, one of the few universities dedicated to this very subject. And they said this, to put it bluntly, is absolutely false. So-called, quote, hate speech is free speech. Now, to have to point that out to the Attorney General of the United States of America is, you could say it's embarrassing on one level, but it shows you that these people, especially, and I'm more critical of the right, the conservatives, because they wrap themselves in the Constitution constantly, and you'd think, or I'm left to conclude by their views, positions, and statements that they haven't even read the Constitution. These people haven't even read it. If they read it and understand it, then they wouldn't have to be corrected by Middle Tennessee University in such embarrassing fashion. And so maybe we should listen to Pam Bondi herself and see what she says. This is in a podcast interview, and literally she was gagging to make this statement in the wake of Charlie's murder. What would Charlie want? Well, I don't think Charlie would actually want this, but this is the Attorney General. Listen.
And there's hate speech. And there is no place, especially now, especially after what happened to Charlie, in our society.
Do you see more law enforcement going after these groups who are using hate speech and putting cuffs on people, so we show them that some action is better than no action?
We will absolutely target you, go after you, if you are targeting anyone with hate speech, anything. And that's across the aisle.
I mean, seriously? Who is this Katie Miller, by the way? Don't you think we should have some action just to show them we're serious? I mean, this is fascist, literally fascist talk, totally disregarding the Bill of Rights. And you know what's worse about this is these are people that work in the media space, podcasters, getting these primo powder puff interviews, lobbying not softball questions, snowball questions, wet snowball, melting snowball questions. Twinkie questions, chucking Twinkies at the AG. Free speech that kind of affects you if you're doing journalism, but these people aren't doing journalism. They're doing political lobbying under the guise of podcasting. This is the fake mainstream alternative media, is what it is. So, honestly, where do we go from here? So she's wrong. Pam Bondi's dead wrong. That's a hell of a thing to get wrong if you're the Attorney General. It's a hell of a thing to get wrong. Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. So let's look at that for a moment. Where does that take us? Well, it takes us here. This is the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. And they penned this piece, why everything Pam Bondi said about, quote, hate speech is wrong. The nation's top law enforcement officer, scary thought, doesn't understand that there is no hate speech exception to the First Amendment, and that's scary. To be corrected by pretty much everybody, and you're the top lawyer, top law enforcement officer in the whole country. But if it's a fascist government, then this is par for the course. And that is actually the most frightening part. What's worse is that there's not more Republicans and so-called conservatives taking her to task on this and demanding her resignation. After making this statement she just made there, we're going to go after them with the full force of the law, people whose opinions we don't like. Resign. Your tenure in office is untenable in the United States of America. Now, in an openly authoritarian regime, that's who you want. You want someone like that. She's doing what she's been told, which was to be brutal and smash the opposition. Looks like a fascist, talks like a fascist, walks like a fascist. You are a fascist by definition. This is not my opinion. There's certain thresholds politically that you need to meet, and this is one of them. So, embarrassingly, she had to walk it back. So 2 days later, Pam Bondi says, hate speech won't be prosecuted. Again, you can't define hate speech. She's still clinging to it. Even in her walk back, her rear guard action here, the panic mode, because real conservatives, people who are libertarians, people with brains, were pushing back against this. But she's still clinging to the quote, like hate speech is a thing. It's not a thing. Hate speech is not a thing. It's not an arbitrary term that you can define. But if you give the government power to label things as hate speech and then prohibit that speech, then you got a big, big problem. Okay? And it's very similar, and we'll get on to this, is the word terrorism. And the Trump administration are at it. They're now declaring amorphous grassroots movements as terrorist in the United States. People without head offices, without a hierarchy of management or leadership. Antifa. They're declaring them a terrorist organization. We'll get into that in a moment. But that's if you give these people too much leeway, this is what you're going to get. Power corrupts, power corrupts, absolutely. Unfortunately. So where did Pam Bondi come from? And this is where the story gets so interesting. Pam Bondi. This is a tale of two Floridians, Pam Bondi and Matt Gaetz. Such an interesting story, this one. Let's focus on that for a moment. Do you remember Matt Gaetz? He used to serve in Congress. Very talented, true MAGA, a true maverick, in fact, and happened to be one of the only people in the entire Congress that voted against this previous legislation while Biden was president to weaponize the anti-Semitism smear in order to prohibit anti-Semitic speech and so forth in America. I mean, it was a total disaster of a bill. Matt Gaetz stood up and rejected it. Matt Gaetz got Kevin McCarthy chucked out as speaker single-handedly. This is somebody who had considerable power in the House of Representatives, and he was not an Israeli stooge. Okay? Matt Gaetz, Republican, could have done a lot of things in the future, could have taken a Senate seat in Florida, could have been Speaker of the House, could have run for president at some point. Okay? And he happened to be minimum neutral, if not not pro-Israel, not in the cult-like sense that's required in Washington. So something funny happened during the Trump transition after Trump wins the November presidential election against Kamala Harris. They start kicking around cabinet picks, and the name Matt Gaetz came up for Attorney General. When I saw that, I thought, that's the stupidest pick for Attorney General you could possibly have. Anybody could do that job. Why would you put Matt Gaetz in there? And people were saying, oh, because he's a Trump loyalist. He's a Trump loyalist. Trump wants his guy in there. There's a bunch of other people that were Trump loyalists that could have easily filled that, including Matt Whitaker, who was acting AG during Trump's first term. And there's just too many other people, lawyers, qualified lawyers, who could fill that role. Why would you take one of the most powerful Republicans in the U.S. Congress, young, talented, a true maverick, very much a populist, in touch with his base? Why would you rip him from the House and stick him into a cabinet position that is going to be ultimately politicized and that, quite frankly, a dozen other people could do? That doesn't make much sense. From a Republican strategic point of view, it makes no sense. So that was interesting. So let's dive further into this mystery. Why was Matt Gaetz selected by Trump? Well, it wasn't long in November, about November 24th, they started floating an old sex scandal that had already been dealt with, debunked, and so forth. A sex scandal, funny enough, that they tried to, it appears to us and many other journalists that they tried to entrap Matt Gaetz, and there were Israeli-linked operatives involved in this a few years previous. They failed to sink Matt Gaetz's congressional career. Clearly, this was a put-up. They resurfaced this old scandal and applied pressure on Gaetz. So he had already stepped away from his congressional seat, had committed to the Trump transition, to becoming AG, and then suddenly was forced to withdraw his Attorney General position over this old scandal that was completely, it appears to be, a setup involving Israeli-linked actors. Amazing. It's almost as if this was pre-planned. And who was going to replace him? Pam Bondi immediately was presented, probably by Mary Madelson or someone like this, as the replacement. She's from Florida as well, not particularly well qualified to be the top lawyer stroke law enforcement person in the country. Her previous gig before this was she was a lobbyist for Israel and other countries and interests and companies, including Qatar and others. But I believe it was Ballard and Associates. They've got offices in Tel Aviv, a big-time Israeli lobby firm, a corporate lobby firm. Okay, that's who she worked for. That's her qualification. That's her resume, her standout resume. Yes, she worked for the government in Florida, who, by the way, have passed some very dodgy pro-Israel state laws, including like anti-BDS stuff. And there's a whole string of things that Ron DeSantis had been championing. But anyway, so she comes in, and there it is right there. Trump names longtime ally Pam Bondi, longtime ally, as his new attorney general after Matt Gaetz withdraws. That was all engineered. Interesting. And what does Pam Bondi do when she gets in? Well, Trump ran on this whole like, oh, we're going to release all the Epstein files, going to release all that. It's going to be public. And then she comes in and she's leading the cover up. They just did an about face in May and June, and decided, oh, there's nothing there. There's no scandal, nothing. All those witness statements, all those court cases, just disregard all that. Nothing to see here. Move along. It's over. No Israeli connections either. And quite frankly, didn't traffic anything to all these high-level ex-presidents, heads of banks, celebrities, U.S. politicians, and so forth. None of that happened, according to Pam Bondi. And that caused a major rift in MAGA-land. So just to reiterate, understand how important this is. They got rid of one of the only bulwarks against a complete Israeli takeover of the U.S. Congress, Matt Gaetz, and replaced him, well, with Randy Fine in Florida, a fire-breathing Zionist who slid seamlessly into Matt Gaetz's seat. We'll see if Randy Fine survives the next election. He probably will. There's plenty of money behind him now. He himself is a Jewish American Zionist, an Israeli loyalist to the hilt. So he's now occupying Matt Gaetz's seat. Matt Gaetz is out of politics. Matt Gaetz is working as a presenter for OAN, One America News. I mean, that's quite a demotion. Quite a demotion. He's out of politics. Israel got rid of him. Israel got rid of him. Nobody on the MAGA right has anything to say about this. And he was replaced by an Israeli operative for all intents and purposes, who is now covering up the Epstein scandal, one of the biggest political blackmail scandals in history. She's leading the cover-up. Isn't that why she was put in there to begin with? Yes, probably. Do you need to be a rocket scientist to figure that one out? Unbelievable. And how few people understand this and get this. It's so obvious. It's beyond obvious what's going on. And then Pam Bondi's attacking the First Amendment with all this righteous indignation about the fallen martyr Charlie Kirk. Hence our image for the show today. If you look at the montage of the show graphic for the Sunday Wire today, we have Donald Trump. There it is. You've got Marco Rubio there with Mike Huckabee touching the wall, kissing the wall, the former wall of the Roman garrison, not the temple. They're kissing a Roman garrison wall, which is a bizarre story in itself. The Wailing Wall, wailing in Roman, or Latin maybe, if you had to actually go back in time. And there's Charlie Kirk, the martyr, who is now being fashioned as Saint Charlie. I mean, I don't think he really achieved saint level in terms of the profoundness of his discourse. And there's Pam Bondi using this crisis, using this strategy to consolidate more power with central government. I mean, honestly, folks, So there it is in a nutshell. That's how they got Bondi in. That's how they covered up the Epstein files. And that's how they're restricting Americans' rights in order to protect Israel from criticism effectively. Now, Charlie Kirk, there's a big circumstantial case and discussion around the fact that he was being leaned on by the Israeli lobby, by Netanyahu himself. Charlie Kirk, head of Turning Point USA. So again, Bondi having to walk back this hate speech thing. Her office will not be prosecuting or investigating anyone for alleged hate speech, only for speech she says unlawfully incites violence. Oh, thank you very much for that correction. Because it has to reach the level of direct incitement, provable incitement. You could apply the term hate speech, but as a secondary description to define what is incitement. That is the legal standard constitutionally, according to the Supreme Court. Of course, I'm not a lawyer. I didn't go to law school. I didn't study constitutional law at university, but I understand that basic legal principle. I can't cite the exact precedent case now. There's at least one famous one. But then again, could Pam Bondi, if quizzed? Maybe she does now. But before she made that interview with Katie Miller, or whatever her name was, saying she's going to go after Americans, could she cite that Supreme Court precedent case? I don't think so. If she could, she would have understood the contents of that case and know that she was completely out of bounds making the statement that she did. So that brings us to this. And this is when this story dropped, the whole Netanyahu crowd and so forth went into panic mode. Okay. So again, they're trying to make a martyr out of Charlie Kirk. Oh, and by the way, just on the Pam Bondi question, not to belabor the point, but what did Charlie Kirk himself, when he was alive, have to say about this whole idea of hate speech? So Pam Bondi is wanting to mobilize the government against anybody who might be saying something offensive about Charlie Kirk and stamp on the First Amendment to do it. What did Charlie Kirk have to say in 2020 about this very application and weaponization by government and institutions on this arbitrary fake term called hate speech? Well, let's listen to Charlie Kirk.
Is that even hate speech should be completely and totally allowed in our country. The most disgusting speech should absolutely be protected. And it's not a viewpoint that is held by the left. The ACLU used to hold this viewpoint. The American Civil Liberties Union, they sued so that legitimate Nazis could march through downtown Skokie. You remember this? Back in the 80s and 90s? Now, why would the ACLU do this? Because they said as soon as you use the word hate, that is a very subjective term. Because then all of a sudden it is in the eyes or it is in the implementation of whomever has the power. So here's my belief. The more speech, the better.
Well, who's going to argue with that? I certainly won't. But that was Charlie Kirk. Don't you think that's a problem that Charlie Kirk was against the thing that Pam Bondi was trying to ruthlessly enforce with the power of the executive? Don't you think that's a little bit of an issue? A little bit of a problem? I think it is. I think it's a bit of a problem. Anyway, back to Bibi. Netanyahu refused, or Charlie Kirk refused Netanyahu's offer to fund Turning Point USA, to pump in on $150 million to this organization, Turning Point USA. And of course, when Charlie refused, Netanyahu invited him to Israel, of course, for probably a struggle session, perhaps tempted with other party favors. That's how they operate in Israel. That's why they bring the Americans over. They'll get you one way or another, as long as they can get you to come to Israel. And Kirk turned him down. Turned him down. Oh, and it gets worse. More disclosures. Look at this. Billionaire Bill Ackman, who, if you follow him on social media, is probably one of the most repulsive commentators. Anyway, again, a fire-breathing Zionist. Israel first. And billionaire Bill Ackman convened a storming Israel intervention session in the Hamptons, the elite enclave in Long Island, with Charlie Kirk, bringing him in for what was effectively, again, a struggle session to try to find out why Charlie is platforming Tucker Carlson at TPUSA events, platforming Marjorie Taylor Greene, all these people that have veered away from Israel. Even Megyn Kelly asking questions. I mean, that's saying something right there. Even she breaks ranks. Dave Smith, comedian Dave Smith, big critic of Israel. He's invited to Turning Point to speak at the events. This caused absolute pandemonium in the Israeli lobby circles. They were just freaking out because they're going to lose control of the 18 to 35 voter demographic of future Republican and conservative voters. They need to bank on this support for the future of Israel. Israel can't survive unless it's got this financial and military lifeline from the United States. It can't negotiate anything. It doesn't negotiate. It just attacks, bombs, and assassinates. And it does so with the full backing of the United States and, of course, smaller backings from Britain and Germany and the EU, but nonetheless, all of that's important. And so here we have a clear case that the most powerful Israeli lobbyists, Netanyahu himself, were flabbergasted with Kirk, who they had relied on previously to promote anti-Muslim fear, to attack Islam, to brand Muslims in America as being sort of, sub-citizens of sorts, saying that Islam is not compatible with our Judeo-Christian values in the West and Western civilization. That level of culture war, Israel loved it. As long as Charlie kept doing that and stayed on message with all the October 7th Israeli version of events and so forth. Everything to justify the ongoing Holocaust Israel's committing against the native Palestinian population in Gaza. Anything to support that. They required undying support because the billionaire class that funds Turning Point USA, that took in $100 million in 2024, Charlie Kirk was their soapbox. They're renting him. He's their mouthpiece. And that went well for many years. But Kirk realized that, especially when the Epstein files cover-up began, MAGA started to fracture big time, in June and July. It was really beginning before that, because a lot of Christian conservatives, especially Catholic Christian conservatives and high-profile Catholic Christian conservatives, were abhorred with what Israel is doing to the Palestinian population. Unlike Christian evangelists and brain-dead cult followers like Mike Huckabee and that type of person, or Ted Cruz, who, quoting the Bible, claiming that God promised the land to Benjamin Netanyahu and that we must support Netanyahu or we will be cursed in America. That's the type of thing Ted Cruz, who's a senator from Texas, he said that on a high-profile interview with Tucker Carlson. These people are like cult, fanatic, kind of deranged, quasi-religious fanatics, or maybe they're just using this shaky religious justification, some kind of fabricated doctrinal religious interpretation to justify outright criminal and psychotic, satanic, just annihilating a whole population, genocide effectively. They find solace. People like Ted Cruz and Mike Huckabee find solace in their scriptures or their interpretation of the scriptures to help them feel like they're not, part of something that's absolutely disgusting and totally anti-Christian and completely against the teachings of Jesus Christ. That's the irony of all this, is all these people who identify as Christian, be they in the United States, especially conservatives and Republicans, they lead with their cross. Crusaders. They think they're modern day crusaders, like Pete Hegseth, with the cross of Jerusalem tattooed all over his chest, literally. They think they're onward Christian soldiers, and they're doing God's work because God commanded Christians to defend and revere and protect and worship Israel. And if they don't, they'll be cursed, according to Ted Cruz and John Hagee and all these other Christian Zionist cult fanatics. These people are religious cultists. There literally is a cigarette paper between them and ISIS. Certainly with Jewish Zionists or Israeli Zionists, what they're doing with American military power to densely populated neighborhoods, they're just killing children every day. It's like a meat grinder. ISIS never got near that. They probably would have liked to, but they just didn't have they didn't have a fleet of F-35s. Well, they did. It was the IDF, who were ISIS's air force in Syria. Another story there. We'll leave that for another program one day. So anyway, all this is going on. And so what's Netanyahu's reaction to all this? You'd think if it was so ridiculous that he would just brush it off and move on, but Netanyahu had to release multiple statements even before anybody accused him of being involved in Charlie Kirk's murder. He then comes out and does official denials before the fact, almost implicating himself as a guilty party, which is bizarre. Here's the man himself. Listen to this. And this is so over the top. I don't even know where to begin. But here he is. And this is such a contrived statement. He's reading off his auto cue, his typical sort of clever, sound bite. It's like sound bites stitched together with a few pneumatic devices baked into his speech. Those of you who know about speech, debate, public relations, and dialogue analysis, discourse analysis, you'll pick up all his little tricks. He does it every time. It's just he so over the top, hams it up to kind of a ridiculous level. But here he is.
Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, said that the bigger the lie, the faster it will spread. Well, somebody has fabricated a monstrous big lie that Israel had something to do with Charlie Kirk's horrific murder. This is insane. It is false. It is outrageous. Charlie Kirk was a giant, a once-in-a-century talent who defended freedom, defended America, defended our common Judeo-Christian civilization. Charlie loved Israel. He loved the Jewish people. He told me so in a letter that he sent me just a few months ago. One of my greatest joys as a Christian, he said, is advocating for Israel and forming alliances with Jews to protect Judeo-Christian civilization. He encouraged me to make the case directly to the American people about how vital Israel is to U.S. national security. He told me, the Holy Land is so important to my life, it pains me to see support for Israel slip away. Now, if Charlie disagreed with a policy of mine or a decision here and there, not only did I not mind, I welcomed it. This is the essence of Charlie. This is the essence of a free country. It's exactly what Charlie stood for.
I mean, I just have to interrupt here. I mean, this is just so fake. Oh, and I welcomed his disagreements. If he didn't support Israel, I encouraged him not to support Israel. I mean, so Netanyahu is one of the worst liars. This guy lies through his teeth. He is he's a wanted war criminal, unrepentant. There's no end to his bloodlust when it comes to Palestinians and Arabs in general. And this guy has the gumption to come up here and extol democratic virtues about free speech and open debate, when he himself and his agents in America, who have pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into the Trump White House, are being pressured to fire people in government, to replace them with Zionist loyalists. And Netanyahu is probably screwing Trump at every opportunity, derailing any potential negotiations for anything with Hamas or with Iran, and then coming on and lying about it and then blaming Hamas for everything breaking down. When in fact, this war criminal is just buying time so he can kill more Palestinians. It really is that simple. And if you haven't worked it out by now, it's been 2 years. For those of us watching the issue closely for 20 or 25 years, some of you longer, you worked this out a long time ago. But if you're just red pilling on this issue, yeah. Let's listen to what else he has to say here.
And I knew that his suggestions always came from the heart, from his love for Israel and from his love for the Jewish people. A few weeks before his death, I spoke to Charlie. I invited him to visit Israel again. And sadly, that won't happen.
Wow. So Netanyahu, this shows you how devious this guy is. He leaves out the important detail. He invited Charlie to visit Israel, and Charlie rejected it. Netanyahu left that important detail out. Instead, he says he won't be able to visit because he's not with us anymore. He wasn't coming anyway, Bibi. Why don't you be, if you're so open about Western civilization, liberal values and democratic values, why don't you tell the truth? Tell the truth. Charlie Kirk rejected you. That's the truth. And you're giving us this complete pile of you-know-what. But this doesn't bother Netanyahu at all. This is what he does. This is who he is.
Now some are peddling these disgusting rumors, perhaps out of obsession, perhaps with Qatari funding. What I do know is this.
Qatari funding. So this is another Israeli propaganda line that they inject through their so-called influencers on X, many of whom their accounts are completely botted up with fake bots. Yeah, when you see these people rise into the millions of followers really quickly, a lot of them have deployed bots, including people in their so-called alternative media, by the way, including anti-Israeli accounts. They're also botted up, many of them. There's a little bit of a industry there. Anyway, Qatari funded? No. Just face the fact, BB, that more and more people, and soon will be the majority in America, it probably already is, but it'll be more obvious majority, totally reject everything that you stand for, everything that you claim, everything that you've done. And they're going to reject it for the next 2 generations or more. You're done. Toast. It's over. That flag behind you, BB, that brand is so badly damaged, it will never recover. And you become the fable. You become the Faustian tale of hubris. because you thought you could get away with it to get that piece of real estate that you so desperately wanted. And you had to get rid of all the native Palestinians to do it. And you had to lie about everything, including deny the fact that you have murdered hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, which will show you the true numbers in a moment. Let's let him finish.
Charlie Kirk was a great man, and a great man deserves honor, not lies. Rest in peace, Charlie Kirk. May your memory be a blessing.
I mean, the fact that Netanyahu called Charlie Kirk a once-in-a-century talent, that's a little bit over the top. But never underestimate these people's ability, this criminal class, let's call it, their ability to overdo it. And as the old Shakespeare saying says, "Thou lady doth protest too much." Netanyahu, his third public statement denying a killing that nobody has really directly accused him of. I think that's a little bit suspicious, but that's just me. I mean, I'm not the only person to point this out, but let's get back. So Goebbels, it's funny that Netanyahu quotes Goebbels, and he misquoted Goebbels. Netanyahu said, as Joseph Goebbels said, the more you tell a lie, the faster it spreads. You know, this charlatan misquoted Goebbels. What did Goebbels actually say? Let's bring that up for a moment. Oh, there we go. Thanks for our wonderful research team at the Sunday Wire. What Goebbels actually said, and by the way, Netanyahu made two errors here. First, he misquoted Goebbels. Then he ripped it out of context to apply it to accusations against the state of Israel. And this is what Goebbels actually said. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. He's talking about the state telling lies. Netanyahu is then flipping Goebbels to try to point that back at journalists and other individuals online that are pointing out and noticing the obvious, which is the circumstantial case that we've just shown you, which the Gray Zone and others have reported, Candace Owens has reported, is overwhelming, the circumstantial case. Now, do we have any evidence, direct evidence, or anything to tie Israel or Netanyahu to Charlie Kirk's killing? No, it's pure speculation on the forensic criminal case. But the circumstantial case is overwhelming. Is that enough to convict? Probably not. But with new evidence that might arise, it could then become a lot more. But anyway, what Goebbels is saying here, the lie can be maintained only for such a time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and or military consequences of the lie. You see, that's the important part, of course, that Netanyahu left out. And it's just so ironic that that applies directly to him and Israel. Let me repeat that. The lie can be maintained only for such a time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and military consequences of the lie, which Israel cannot, which the United States cannot, which Pam Bondi cannot. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent. Same quote, which is what the U.S. is doing, which is what Pam Bondi is doing, which is what Benjamin Netanyahu and all his Israeli billionaire donors are pressuring the U.S. to do, and Britain, and the EU, and Germany, and other European countries under the thumb of the Israeli lobby. Amazing. This is from Goebbels. And Goebbels continues, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. Wow. Now, if this is a translated quote, which I pulled off This quote exists on many quotation web pages. Now, I haven't done the academic rigor to say if this is the correct translation and so forth. But isn't that amazing? That same quote that Netanyahu tried to lift off Goebbels, it directly implicates him and the Trump administration and the British government and the German government and Ursula von der Leyen and the EU, whatever it is, government, Politburo, I'm not sure what to call it, and the Israeli Knesset. They fall into this one as well. Isn't that amazing? So we just kind of done just basic research to not only correct Netanyahu, but turn his feeble attempt to somehow use Goebbels as a weapon against his adversaries and turn it right back on him and show that no. So here's the bottom line, folks. This is what you got to understand. Goebbels, Joseph Goebbels, Adolf Hitler's Minister of Information, Propaganda, and Public Relations. Or the term public relations didn't come till after the war, or wasn't widely accepted as a term till after the war, thanks to Edward Bernays, who rebranded propaganda to public relations as a new term, more of a politically correct term, more accurate, in fact. So, and all we're saying is it's a very rich of Bibi to use Goebbels. But both of these men, listen, we can all agree, both of these men are very passionate about their propaganda. Very passionate indeed. So passionate that they're willing to go to the wall in order to defend the big lie. Isn't that ironic? Netanyahu just buries himself inadvertently, but that's how it goes at this stage. At this stage of the farce, that's how it goes. You'll start seeing more and more of these desperate lunges, these epic face plants by people like Netanyahu, by Trump himself. And Trump had to get in on the act as well. Here's Trump on this. So Trump went out for dinner, and Code Pink or some anti-war protesters came in and ruined his dinner. I think it was in New York. I can't remember what restaurant it was. Trump was out there dining with the great and the good, the public, or whatever. And he was very upset. And so this was Trump's reaction to that, which to me is quite shocking on its face. Here's Donald Trump. This is what he says he's going to do to the anti-war, anti-genocide protesters that interrupted his recent dinner. This is a president of the United States, folks.
Women, in many cases, women, you can see they're professional agitators. I had one the other night. I had 4 the other night, all in one group, total phonies. I started to scream when I got into a restaurant, oh, something with Palestine. And I said, well, I'm doing a great job for peace in the Middle East. I should get lots of awards for that, right? With the Abraham Accords and everything else. But a woman just stood up and started screaming. And she got booed out of the place, too. There were a lot of people in the restaurant. I went there to show how safe, and it was safe. I mean, the woman is just a mouthpiece. All she was a paid agitator. And you have a lot of them. And I've asked Pam to look into that in terms of RICO, bringing RICO cases against the criminal RICO, because they should be put in jail. What they're doing to this country is really subversive.
Wow. RICO case, huh, Donald? Really? Really? Racketeering? So exercising your First Amendment right, whether you like it or not, Donald Trump is going to prosecute that as criminal racketeering. That's a little bit fascistic. Just, little bit. It's a little bit fascistic. Hate to point that out to you so-called conservatives, There's nothing conservative about what the president just said, and it should make you conclude, if you have any working gray matter, that the president of the United States is not a conservative. He has abandoned all pretense of being, quote, conservative. That's a full-blown, kind of helpless, flailing fascist going on right there. That's not the worst clip, by the way. So this is a person that wants to flatten Gaza and turn it into Dubai. He sees it as a big property deal. And here's Smotrich. This is Trump's buddy. Bezalel Smotrich. Gaza is a potential real estate bonanza. Israel talking with the U.S. about dividing it up. That's the Times of Israel right there. Times of Israel. So they're not hiding it. They're not hiding it. And this is the ash heap that Donald Trump is presiding over here. This is how they're going to get their big real estate deal. Look at this. This is an academic report done by academics and scientists doing a full multivariant analysis, data analysis on the dead and the missing in Gaza. The true number right now from direct Israeli airstrikes, starvation, malnutrition, dysentery, injuries, dead and missing. In the last 2 years, they estimate, based on data collected, 680,000 dead or missing, including, get this, 380,000 are infants under the age of 5. These are Western, mixture of Western, and there might even be an Israeli academic who worked on this as well. Dr. Gideon Polya, possibly Israeli. I'm not sure. We have to check that. But let's just say conservatively, we could say easily over 250,000. Based on Harvard Dataverse, had it 378,000. So let's split the difference here, 500,000. Let's just call it 500,000 right now. 2 years, 500,000. At what point does the righteous indignation arrive for you guys in America and for leaders like Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron and Friedrich Merz and Ursula von der Leyen? Where does the ethical or moral trigger, when does that switch get flipped? Do you have a heart? Do you have a conscience? Or are you just terrified of the Israeli lobby? You're going to get Jeremy Corbyn. I'm telling you, you guys are so on the wrong side of history that it's not even A-list celebrities are breaking ranks now. They don't care about the Zionist-controlled film studios in Hollywood denying them the next big blockbuster. They don't care. They're coming out and speaking. Ben Cumberbatch, other A-list actors, and so finally breaking ranks coming out. So there it is, folks. I mean, we don't have to stop there. Just take a look. There's no shortage of footage. I mean, look at this. That's your legacy right there. All you so-called conservatives, all you so-called, whatever you call yourselves, Christians, Christian conservatives, all this other stuff. Look what you guys have done. This is what you've done. There's plenty of, you don't care about the Muslims in Palestine, so there's plenty of Christians and Christian conservatives and Christian, Orthodox Christian and Catholic and Protestant and whatever. There's plenty of them buried under the rubble as well. And some of their churches are amongst all that flattened landscape. They've dropped more munitions than Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. And you guys are sitting back saying, oh, no, it's not a genocide. And no, there's no famine there. That's all Hamas propaganda. You're content to sit back and go with that line, which is, pretty disgusting. That's your legacy. There's blood on your hands. Everybody who's afraid to comment on this or stayed silent because they're afraid of getting canceled or whatever, that's your legacy. You helped to manufacture consent for this. It's not too late to sort of come to the side of humanity on this issue. You're dealing with a very, very incredible criminal enterprise that has carried this out. And they're not stopping in Gaza, by the way. If this goes unpunished, there's more to come. Lebanon, etc., there's more to come. There's no limit to what these people will do. So that's all we're saying. We're just trying to point this out to everybody. And, how bad could this get in terms of U.S. politics? And if you follow our work, we have been questioning the terrorist designation of the British direct action organization called Palestine Action. There's a legal case. There's a legal argument. There are legal arguments right now in process. We spoke to at least one of the lawyers on this case to remove the designation of terrorists from Palestine Action, a British direct action group that hasn't carried out any so-called terrorist attacks, but they have targeted arms manufacturers that are sending weapons to Israel, who, according to the International Criminal Courts of Justice, is committing genocide. According to the UN, is committing genocide. So that's direct action activism that has been protected in the past by the British courts. So that's happening now. And people were questioning that. Why? Because it sets a dangerous precedent. Because if you can just label anybody a terrorist group, and anyone who's defending them as terrorist or supporting them as terrorist or wearing a T-shirt, where does it end? Where exactly does that story end? And it's not. This is not a problem that's going to go away. It's going to get worse. And it leads you to this: can Trump label Antifa as a domestic terror group? Legally, there's no such thing. But this is where they're going. So Antifa, this amorphous direct action group, doesn't have any organizational hierarchy. It's just like a brand or a concept of people that are against what they believe are fascist entities, forces, and government institutions, and so forth. Now, I have seen this group in the past doing some crazy things. So I've been extremely critical of Antifa or people who identify with Antifa over the years. My record's pretty clear on that. But one of the reasons we at 21 Wire have been critical of them is because we believe that they were infiltrated by the federal government, and that it's an easy hangout for federal informants, black bloc types, who can go in there as agent provocateurs, and by doing so, empower the federal government to clamp down on the right of assembly and free speech, and taking direct action. In this case, even it could involve fights against what they deem to be fascist. Of course, criminal activity, you'll get arrested and charged. For if you're engaged in assault or battery, you will get arrested and charged. That falls under crime. Is it terrorism? I don't think so. It's still very much in the realm of political and criminal activity, whereby they're not doing suicide bombs, they're not blowing up cars, they're very public and open about this stuff. But the federal government's not public and open about how it infiltrates this and every other activist group on the right, the left, the Greens, and everything in between, including so-called Islamic terror cells. And we have covered that on this show and at 21st Century Wire through the Daily Shooter genre that we coined at 21 Wire and Alternate Current Radio in the Boiler Room. So that's the problem here, is the FBI under Kash Patel, will they start doing all that dirty informant infiltration that's been going on like crazy since J. Edgar Hoover was the head of that organization? It'd be very hard to not resist doing that. That's what the institution's been doing for decades, since before the Second World War. Hoover's reign as FBI director extended from, I believe, the 1930s right up to the late 1960s. It's a long tenure. And they got into everybody. Hutari militia, patriot groups, Timothy McVeigh, Elohim City, civil rights activists, black nationalist, white nationalist, green, climate, all of it. Anti-war, anti-Vietnam, you name it. Al-Qaeda, yeah, very involved. World Trade Center bombing, 1993. FBI, directly involved. Directly. So we're just saying, that's the historic record. You might not like it, but those are the facts. So we're concerned about that, of course. We're concerned about the direction in which all of this is headed. And but most of all, we're concerned about that, because that's happening right now as we speak. It is probably the most disgusting thing. I mean, it's shameful. And Donald Trump is just shown himself to be such an ignoramus and such a corrupt stooge of a foreign lobby. He's still talking about beheaded babies on October 7th, a complete lie. And what Hamas did and da-da-da-da. I mean, it shows you how weak and, misinformed and, quite frankly, just a really stupid take on a lot of these important issues, many of which these propaganda lines have been completely discredited and debunked. But like Joe Biden, who was absent-minded, I think Trump at his age is also absent-minded. So we have another geriatric president, the second in a row, who doesn't know whether he's coming or going on a good day. And it won't be long till he'll be wondering whether he's actually in charge or not. I think he knows the answer to that already. We know who's in charge. Let's take a break. Again, that's where we stand on this issue. And again, just to reiterate, my position in general on Charlie Kirk as an individual. Listen, he was a political tool. He was a tool of the billionaire donor class that pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into Turning Point USA since 2012. Charlie Kirk was used as a figurehead, and whether they were Christian donors or Jewish donors, they had both. They were all Zionist. All those big donors were Zionists. So they expected Charlie Kirk to be the shepherd for that flock. And he was. He did a very good job for them for a very long time, but things changed this year. The pressure became too great. The fractures within MAGA, within the Trump base that Charlie was tasked to manage, 18 to 35 Trump supporters. The fractures, it became irreconcilable differences over the Epstein file cover-up by Pam Bondi and the ongoing actual Holocaust in Gaza by Israel, by Netanyahu, backed by Trump 110%. This has become a problem. Charlie Kirk was forced, for his own waning credibility, to address these issues. Otherwise, you would have saw that base there completely fall apart and quickly. And then, as if by magic, this assassination, the shooting happens, of which we don't have any really reliable forensic explanation or ballistics reports or anything. A lot of confusion and, quite frankly, some confounding facts regarding the shooting itself, which we can get into at another time, but plenty of people are delving into that on social media. But before we go, well, actually, I'll leave this last bit, which is about Charlie Kirk's wife, Erica, and doing a deep dive on his wife. Then things start to get really interesting. We're going to leave that for Overdrive with our teammates, Hesher, Ruckus, maybe Basil Valentine. We'll see. Let's take a break right now. This is the Sunday Wire. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. This is 21stCenturyWire.com. Thank you for joining us on the live streams. We'll take a break here, and we'll be back, episode 561 of this weekly omnibus news and analysis radio program. And again, let's listen to the music of Joseph Arthur. We'll be back in a minute.
Sides when their mothers cry, and no real way to justify their death that comes from an evil sky. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now in Gaza somehow. Damaged like a nuclear bomb, dressed in a kill box. People can't escape. They're told to leave, but where can they go? A genocide, some think it's biblical faith. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now in Gaza somehow. Might be the last time to raise a hand about who we are. What's this say about who we are? 'Cause this might be the last time to raise a hand about who we are. What's this say about who we are? digital images and digital lies. Cut out their heart along with their supply. The propaganda leads to dehumanize our fellow humans and silence their cries. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now in Gaza somehow. Without equality, there will always be war. We have all the history to see how it's happened before. Travel as equals, equality for all, or else mankind will surely fall. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now in Gaza somehow. 'Cause this might be the last time to raise a hand about who we are. What's this say?